All right, great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the overall show. And of course, this is my story. We are doing the story night every Friday of every week. We promise you to be bringing some of the most interesting stories that are happening across the continent, across the world. Stories about people, stories about things, stories about different experiences of life. And thank you so much for joining us last week on Friday when we had a conversation here with Stephen Omukoko discussing about his experiences during COVID and how it was the quarantine season and everything that was happening around then. So tonight we are here to talk about protests across the continent. On 20th of March 2023, all the four gates of Africa were open. The gate to the east, Kenya; the gate to the south, South Africa; the gate to the north, Tunisia; and the gate to the west, Nigeria. All these four nations, the capital cities and the major cities, were on protest. The question we're asking ourselves tonight: why are there protests across the continent? Are these protests effective? And what else can we do to ensure that the common person on the ground actually his or her needs are met or are getting addressed? Welcome on board, gentlemen. Gilbert Stark from Nairobi, Ohisa Duo from South Sudan, and my good brother Ali from South Africa. Welcome. Let me start with you, Ali. A quick introduction of yourself. What are you doing right now? How are you doing? And what is happening around you?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's watching. My name is Ali Mushimanyana Wasakoli Popo. Thank you so much, my brother Mr. Ponto, for inviting me. As I have introduced myself, that my name is Ali, joining live from South Africa at the province of Limpopo. Nothing much is happening this side. It's Easter. People went out to different conferences. For churches, we see on the roads, it's a very, very busy one. And the streets in the village, in the towns are very quiet because people went to church. And nothing much happening this side, just that we're battling with the load shedding.
And also, Ali, I know today is also a great day for South Africa. I don't know that you mentioned for South Africa, but because South Africa is part of the BRICS, and I see China, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, India, all talking about their own currency. The
Oh,
dollarization
yes.
is true.
Oh,
It is
yes.
happening. Let's see how that goes. Welcome on board, Gilbert.
Yeah, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all the protocols observing. It's a fine day, nothing much. Uh, Quite interesting. Today there was a religious function, so there's nothing much going on. The Catholics were actually walking uh, Jesus along the streets. So yeah, it all went well. Nothing much. It's just thriving. Yeah. Thank you for.
Thank you so much. I know it is very common practice here in Kenya, the way of the cross. People
Yeah.
walk around carrying the cross to signify what Jesus went through, all the suffering towards his death on Good Friday that happened today at 3 p.m. when the curtain split. And we all understand this story, and I know these are some of the teachings. I don't know the South if that happens in South Africa, Ali, but I'll come back to you later. Oisa Oduho, our brother from South Sudan. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Brother Pondo. I greet everyone who is watching in the name of our motherland, Africa. I trust everyone is doing well, everyone is going on well, and despite the indeed various protests happening in various parts of the continent, I believe it is Africa's time. And of course, I trust we shall be maximizing this time to exhaust this subject. And I, for one, look forward to it. And I hope you all do too.
Great. Thank you. This is amazing. So the protests are happening across Africa. Some other people say Africa is rising. Some other people say that, look, guys, you need to be very careful. This is not Africa rising. Be very careful when all your four gates are open at the same time. Who is entering into your houses? If the gate on the south, South Africa is open, the gate to the west, Nigeria, Tunisia on the north, and to the east, Kenya. Someone was actually asking that by the end of all this, who is getting into the continent? Are these protests just there to cover up something that is happening that we don't know? Or are they actually pro the people? And I know this is a conversation that even Kenyans right now are having. Our demonstrations really about the people. South Africa, Ali, you'll be telling us, are the demonstration really there about the people? And to everyone who is watching across the continent, let us know where you're joining us from, whether you're joining from South Africa, Central Africa, the northern part, or Western, or here in East Africa. Do feel welcome. Ali, let me start with you. And you know why I'm treating you as a very urgent case? Because any moment from now, you will be in darkness.
Yeah.
By the Ali, explain to me what exactly happens in South Africa that every evening you have like a blackout.
Yeah, let me start that. We're actually having issues this side. We are informed that there are those people that are called the coal mafias. There are people who are actually supplying the state with the coal. So they end up actually taking the grade A coal and actually taking the lower quality coal to the power stations. It end up a lot of things happening, and there's also corruption that is taking part. That's why we're having issues of load shedding. But we're getting there bit by bit. The Ministry of Electricity was appointed, so we're getting there. So while we're speaking about the issues of this industrial action that are taking part, it's becoming a norm. I don't know about Kenya and other countries, but in South Africa, it's becoming a norm because we've realized that the only way to end up raising our voice and to make sure that we are heard, we just need to go to the street and sing, Joina, Joina, Joina Muzabalaza. That's the only thing that we need to do, because of if you can't go to the road and sing, bend the tires, close the road, disturb some of the services that need to be part, they will never listen to you. I can tell you. Currently, as we're speaking, I'm in the village. We have a lot of challenges. While you go to the municipal offices, you report that we don't have electricity, we don't have water, we don't have proper roads. They will listen to you, write your issues down, and then from there, they are done with it. But as a community, if we mobilize and we go to the roads and we strike, action is taking part. There are a lot of things that I could tell you that we have achieved them because of the industrial action. Remember, when the Economic Freedom Fighter, EFF, led by Honorable President Julius Malema, when they embarked on industrial action, a march, where they demanded that the President of South Africa, Honorable His Excellency President Matamela, Cyril Ramaphosa, to step down and demanding that load shedding must end. We have seen a lot of improvements from there. They've reduced the stages of power cuts, which shows that embarking on industrial action, it works. Our voice has been listened. And it has been proven that on the 16th of June, the 16th June Soweto uprising, when some of the students, they were fighting for their rights, that they don't want to speak Afrikaner in the school. They want English to be a major language. It happened. People died. People fought for that. Today, as we're speaking, English has been used. So we are actually turning to industrial actions so that our voice can be heard. I can tell you, in Africa, most of the leaders, they don't listen to us. They just want us to cause problems so that they can be able to listen to us.
Okay, I think we are losing Ali, but we are all getting what he's saying.
Sorry
okay, Ali,
you're
back.
Sorry about that.
You're back. Go on.
Sorry about that. I was saying that in South Africa, the only way that the government can be able to listen to you, you can try all the channels, my brother. We can try them, take them to the court. You can try to approach their offices by sending the non-profit organizations. You can try to do that. They will listen to you. They will file it out and open a nice file for you, but they will never take action. Only way for them to listen to us is to embark on industrial action. 2, industrial actions are working for us because we see a lot of changes that are happening now. Because of the problem is that most of our leaders are leaders because of what actually happened back to these days. Are leaders based on history, are not leaders because of we have chosen them to be leaders. They will tell you that in 1990, hey, my father died, so now I need to benefit because of that. That's why most of them are not able to lead. When we go to them, we ask assistance from them, they're not able to listen to us. But I'm telling you, The youth now knows a better channel that embarking on industrial action and a peaceful one. That's the only way that the government can listen. And it's a very boring and a very shocking that we have to burn tires on the tire road. We have to destroy the government assets in order for us to get the attention. What else things have changed? We can use social media, but I can tell you, it's working for us. I don't know about African countries, but for us, it's working. Because let me tell you very quickly, we see a high number of unemployment this side of South Africa. The only way people they can be employed, we see groups of people embarking on industrial action, facing those companies that are not giving them jobs, saying, "Hey, you guys are working on our place, you are working on our territory. Give us jobs or else you close." And it happens; they get jobs. But if you send 2 people, 3 people to go there to negotiate with them, I'm telling you, they will never listen to you. They rather bribe that person and then we are done. But if we embark on industrial action, our voice is getting beheard. Remember, we have a freedom of speech, right? We have a freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm just going to be brief.
Okay. Thank you. I think a very good way to start it from our brother in South Africa, just to get to understand what is happening in South Africa. Gilbert, what is happening? Why these protests all of a sudden across the continent, my brother?
For me, the way I see it is that the reason why these protests are happening is for various reasons. For example, I'll speak of my country, Kenya. Mainly, people are on the streets thriving to express themselves upon various issues, economic issues to be precise, facing them. And other places is about the exercise of rule that is being imposed upon them. It is like they're trying to find a way whereby they can get a common ground and get to reason with the necessary bodies or the apparent bodies in power. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Oduho, what do you think, Barbara?
I think that it is just simply Africa's time. The wave of protests has, in fact, in Africa is more recent as compared to other parts of the world. And we can say, I can say with a certain level of certainty that the wave began with the Arab Spring, and it has been moving around the world. It has gone to South America. It has gone to parts of Europe. For example, even we can see France, a perfect example of the matter. And I can just say it is Africa's time. It is a time where the people have found themselves in a situation which couples not only what is happening within the country, but also exacerbated by what is happening globally. And that these protests are purely happening because of the economic situation on ground affecting the people's daily life and well-being. That because of an impending global crisis, there is hence the fact that the prices of goods and services are rising, and that this, coupled with an incompetent government, is in itself a recipe for revolution. And most of the time they begin with protests. And as such, we can see how the Arab Spring ended, and it ended with the change of regime in most, if not all, of the countries that participated in this process. It is that the people get fed up and are simply unable to proceed any further with the current status quo because the home is no longer livable. In the sense that because of ever rising food prices and the cost of living generally, that someone has to blame. And unfortunately, government is the only entity that can be blamed. And hence, that frustration ultimately is turned to government. And this would be my 2 cents in trying to understand why the protests are happening, especially at this time and in the manner in which they are.
Okay. Wonderful. So Ali has just left the panel. I want to believe maybe probably because of the blackout right now again in his country. Gilbert, you're still here with us, or do you still here with us? For everyone who is watching and listening, New Perspective is saying good to see you, Brother Oduho. My sister Chinenye from Nigeria, I see you are there listening and watching. Thank you so much. So the big question again, we are also forced to ask ourselves right now, who are the people leading these demonstrations? Are these demonstrations about the common people or about the selfish interest of the politicians? I'll give a good example of a place like Tunisia, for example. The Arab Spring began in Tunisia. And actually, Tunisia is a good example of what they say, that the more things change, the more they remain the same. Years later, Tunisia is back to where it was. The president, actually, the one who became a president after the uprising, has taken the country back to where it was. I'm aware that in 2021, the parliament was banned, and now he is the only person who can make every single decision for the country. That's now where Tunisia is heading back to. The media has been gagged. The organizations, in case any organization is there talking about democracy, about governance, you are likely to be, all your activities are likely to be suspended and you'll be thrown out of the country. And not only that, Tunisia has even gone ahead now even to make it very difficult for other Africans in the continent to visit the country. Yet it's one of the places, this is one of the, these are among the things that we're talking about. As we talk about Agenda 2063, Mr. Oduho, will agree with me. These are the things that we are fighting hard to start removing, the barriers, the borders and the border barriers and anything that maybe that stops Africans from trading and visiting and cooperating with each other. Gilbert, do you think these demonstrations across the continent, specifically in your country, are they about the people, or the politicians have some hidden agendas with the demonstrations?
For me, the way I see it is that to the people, is a two-way. It's a two-way sided. A big old agenda which is being discussed or addressed, but then obviously people have their own interest. I believe that for a common Mwananchi, he or she is going on the streets to complain on the price of maize flour that he or she is purchasing every day. And for politicians, I would say, based based on my past experience with the leadership, especially in my country, it's never certain. You can never know. It's never certain. But for one thing that I know is that for the common Mananchi, they are addressing the issues that are facing them. For the politicians, it's rather certain when it's done. You can never know. Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah,
see that. Yes, Oduho.
I would agree with Gilbert entirely, and my perspective on the matter would be this, in even just slightest contrast, that indeed it is both. The answer to your question is that it is both. It is both the people standing up, fighting for what they believe in, what they believe is their right, but also a perfect opportunity is created where politicians take advantage of the situation and to an extent maintain political relevance because of such matters, and of course, as the cost of the cause of many reactive revolutions has been the cost of living. You find that it is a matter of striking the hammer while the iron is hot, and proverbially so, when the cost of living is high, then the iron is hot, and therein comes the politician to indeed strike the hammer.
Okay, that is interesting. Maurice Odede also joining us. More, thank you so much for joining and for always being there to support our programs, to support our shows. Thank you. And Gilbert, back to you. So when you say that is achieving two things, Someone recently asked that when Mr. Raila Odinga and Ruto actually gave speeches and talking and say, we are calling off demonstration, especially Mr. Raila Odinga, we are calling off demonstration. Some other people felt a bit shortchanged that, the issues about the cost of living, which had been part of their discussions before, was not really coming out clear, and yet he was willing to let it go. And even people said, why didn't just Kenyans, the ordinary Kenyans, keep on pushing the government? Because to them, that is what they really wanted. Gilbert, what is your say on this?
So my say is that normally Africa, we forget one thing. When we want to address our issues, we never question our habits and beliefs. Those two things, habits and beliefs. Contrary to popular belief, is that it is believed that when a person who has influence over power gives a voice, then the people contrary to follow or adhere to what he says, and people will definitely go out and follow the guy and try and help him address what he's trying to address. That's a habit. And belief, I won't say much on belief because, like, Africa, we are moving forward, and we are not in the olden ages whereby when someone in power shares a belief, then like it's contrary, everyone will follow path. I mean, like we have people rising, we have people addressing what they believing and everything. So it's a matter of habit. It's a matter of habit. So for me, I think that as a country and as a continent, we have to examine our habits. And if we tend to follow for what we think we are being helped to fight for, because it is normally, human beings, it is like you follow and then I follow. If there's no one who is following to take the blame or to raise a voice that someone that is actually believed to know a reasoning or a negotiation point with the persons in power, then they'll addressing the addressing of the issues will not happen. Yeah. So I think as Africans, we should address our beliefs, and we should address the issue of our beliefs and habits before we go to fight for our interests. That is like to us ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. There's a very interesting comment here that the protest, let me bring the comment to the screen, that the protest between two political parties, as witnessed recently in Kenya, is for me a show of power. Yes, this listen and this view actually saying that it's just a show of power. It's not really about the people. Mr. Dugo, what do you think across the continent? Is this what is happening? And in the meantime, let me also say a big shout out to Ngugi Karoki. Thank you so much for joining us. And Rafael Nyoni also joining us all the way from Tanzania. Karibu sana. Mr. Ngugi Karoki, thank you so much for joining. Rafael Nyoni, if it's okay with you, you can even maybe come to the panel. I can share with you the link in case. Let me know if you have something to share. I just dropped you the link on how to call in and share something on the panel briefly before letting you go. My story goes ahead to say, where the poor, jobless, and wandering youth are used as instruments of distraction to their selfish advantage. Did you see that? She goes
Yes.
ahead to say that the show of power, where the poor, jobless, and wandering youth are used as instruments of distraction to their selfish advantage. What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, there are we must ask ourselves a very fundamental question: why are these protests happening in the first place? So we see that these are masses of individuals who clearly have pent up frustration about the current status quo, and that the only solution that they have at their disposal is indeed to picket and demonstrate, and that while at the same time, it is true that there are those politicians who do take advantage of such situation, it does not go, or rather, that does not mean to say that we should discredit the fundamental issues being addressed in any of these protests in any part of the continent. So, for example, here in Kenya, the fundamental issue is a matter of electoral reform. Now, surely this cannot it cannot be understated in any way. For the matter itself is a weighty matter, and that it involves every participating citizen of a country. A constitution is known as a social contract in which every community that abides by it does so willingly, and that they that indeed they are not. I'm laughing because of the comment.
No, actually, I've just heard what you're saying, and I remember this. This is what actually Mukoko was saying. Remember to
Yes.
talk about the social contract, and here you are talking about the social contract.
Indeed. So we find that a social contract, it's just as a contract is, it is something that all parties must be willingly assigned to it, in the sense that no one is being forced. So, for example, in a situation where you find that a good number of the population has been constantly disenfranchised, then you are bound to eventually see that ticking time bomb going off. Unfortunately, it is all a matter of time. And as such, people look to leaders to steer these demonstrations, and the picketing. Why? Because, well, people need direction. And this is why we have leaders. But unfortunately, in Africa's case, we find that there are those individuals who indeed take advantage, but at the same time, it is a matter of to what extent are the people's needs being addressed. Because one thing is a matter of fact, that the reason why these masses are out in the public, out picketing and demonstrating, is because these governments are not working for them. Otherwise, they would not be feeling this frustration, and they would not need a reason to go out. So that, unfortunately, as the case may be, that there are indeed those young people who are used to cause mayhem and cause violence. And I believe this is where I can refer to where Ali Malikani began this issue, that it matters, bottom line, it matters whether it's actually working or not. Because if elections themselves are not sufficient to ensure that the people's voices are heard, then there is only one other option. Surely it is not the bullet, but to picket. But of course, as Malcolm X would put it, it is either the ballot or the bullet. It reaches a point in a nation's history where if democracy, if dialogue, if elections is not sufficient to bring about the change that indeed should be addressing the concerns of not a quote unquote majority part of the population, rather the entire of the population. Indeed, what we are creating is a ticking time bomb, which will eventually blow. And here we now see that in various parts of the country, of the continent rather, this bomb is literally about to blow. And unfortunately, whether we may like it or not, the leaders of opposition leading and championing these demonstrations are the ones who are equipped to steer these protests in either a positive or a destructive direction. And so this, as unfortunate as it may be, is our case, in my opinion.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. My dear sister here was I to say those in other African countries protests are, the protests are inconsequential to the leaders who unfortunately lack understanding of what leadership is about. Hence, our protest can't evoke any compassion. She goes ahead to state also that the mindset of African leaders sadden and make me wonder and worry about the future of this continent, that is Africa, where leadership has become a disabling weapon, where people's skills have no place to flourish. I mean, it is quite saddening, Mr. Duho and Gilbert, right here on the panel, And now again, we have to go back to the streets, something that our fathers and great grandfathers did a long time ago to bring us the independence, the freedom that we're talking about right now. They went out of their way to fight for the multi-party democracy, to fight for the space and the freedom. And now it is again shocking that to date, an African child who has gone to school cannot get a job. So many young Africans are drowning in the sea while trying to cross, during the waters while trying to cross to Europe. We've seen so many young Africans willingly joining militias and terror groups because that is now the only option. We've also seen so many young people dying because of depression because you go to school, um, nothing to do, nowhere to practice your skill. You are told kazi ni kazi, job is job, get anything that you can do. You know, sometimes they even remind you that don't worry, even if you've done economics or you studied engineering, as long as you can sweep and earn something. Sometimes I ask myself, is this really the direction that we have to go to? Is it that we have leaders and people in power who don't really think about us? Is it that every time, because we know, we can always do a projection, like right now we know the number of people will be churning out into the job market, whether it is in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Sierra Leone, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, wherever, they know. And leaders are supposed to be working tirelessly day and night to ensure that by the time these people are ready for the job market, the jobs are there. I think that's the only way to be proud of this continent. And for some reasons, people say that is why young Africans are now ready to do anything. They're ready to be involved in anything as long as it will bring them the change that they want. But now the question I'm asking myself, are these protests actually effective? Are they working, Mr. Gilbert?
Yeah, this protest, the protests that are happening. I think from the comment, the protest will never work. It will never work because one thing, for I myself, I believe that the current situation about leadership in Africa, somebody will grow in a community, address the issues of good governance and participate. And at the end of it all, I don't know where people get lost. This person will enter into power and consider salary or whatever he or she will benefit from power, instead of addressing the the code or the core principle of leadership in which he or she took an oath to adhere to some time back. So we have what is called power, something called power, and power is categorized into three, three forms. We have hard power, soft power, and smart power. Most in Africa, our leaders tend to be smart by tending to use what is normally considered as smart power, whereby you tend to encompass both hardship and also diplomatic actions. Uh, let's say by fighting the citizens economical wise and also using the necessary law enforcement agencies just to smoothen your interest. So for me, what I see is that Africa, we are way, way, way. In as much as Oduo said that Africa is rising, but if we tend to put African countries, the ones that are quite a bit behind the rising countries on international relations. I mean, these countries are just under the radar because like you cannot, when you tend to look at the distribution of power, you cannot ignore the countries that are way behind. In
Mhm.
a scale, they quite contribute a lot. And so, like as Africans, we have to be also very cautious. Just like the way Opondo said, you have to be very careful to who is knocking at your door and entering. You have to be cautious. Necessarily, if an argument begins in the house, the havoc, most likely there's a possibility that the visitor might be the source. So Africa, it is time to concentrate and look at the core principle of our involvement in governance. It is just us. I mean, like the problems are within us, and the solutions are within us. But most importantly, even if as we address our issues in the house, let's be careful on whether we involve the guests or we talk after the guests are gone. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gilbert. Duho, I see you're ready for this.
Yes, I am. So, on the question of whether the protests are working, my answer is simple: they must work. For the alternative is war.
Yeah, so actually the question that I'm asking right now, are they working?
Yes.
And if not, I think later on we'll be addressing the question on what then must we do to make sure that these protests are becoming productive. For now, are they working?
Yes, I would say they are working. So, for example, using the example of Kenya, then I would say they're working because indeed it has reached the point where dialogue has commenced, whether or not it is so. Regardless of whether it's imperfect, it is that dialogue has commenced, and that this should, if anything, was the goal of those in protest in the first place. In the case of South Africa, I believe Malekane has put it out very clear that while the methodology may not necessarily be generally accepted, what matters is that those in power make the decisions to bring about the change that is required. And so in Tunisia, I believe you put it quite well, that indeed there is a gag on the media, and hence it is quite difficult to know exactly what is happening in Tunisia. But the very fact that that has happened as such is an indication that it is working. It is getting the attention of the individual in power. And if anything, that is the purpose of these demonstrations, to get the attention of those in power first, so that they may hear that which they were unable to address once they got into power, simply because a majority voted them in.
I see. Yes, Gilbert?
Yeah, on Mukoko's point, I have something rather to. It is. I don't know if it's conflicting.
Are you commenting about Mukoko or Oduho?
Oduo, yeah, Oduo.
Oh.
Sorry. Oduo. So I don't know whether it will conflict, but my reasoning is, Oduo, let's not forget to ask ourselves: are these leaders being soft or they are being smart? That's a very important question. They might act smart. They might act smart, or they might act soft. By acting smart, you don't know what to expect. You can never know what to expect. And by acting soft, it means actually they have sat down and they are ready for dialogue, and everything is down, and like there's a common ground, and everything is like changing. But apparently, with the current situation, I think these leaders are just being smart.
Yeah, I would agree. I would not disagree with that point at all.
Okay, so now here's the thing. It looks like if they can't listen to us, then now we have to go to the streets and we have to do these peaceful demonstrations and the protests, which are allowed, I think, in most of the constitutions across the continent. How then do we ensure that these protests result to what we want them to result to? Because the question has always been, when people go out to protest, they end up even actually causing harm to fellow common people. They end up shutting and killing their own businesses. They end up, harming each other. People fight. Sometimes people are fighting against the police. Sometimes also clear that the police do not really know their role in a demonstration. Yes, as Mukoko stated here last time, that even during the COVID times, on imposing the guidelines of, you remember the curfews and the quarantine, the police sometimes went overboard. In most cases, they went overboard. And right now, again, on the same, we do not want to see a situation where we are clashing the police, because by the end of it all, somewhere life will be lost. That's the same life that we're fighting for. Now it is gone. Oduho, how do we ensure that then these protests are giving birth to the right fruits that we are looking for?
Well, the fact that it is a right provided for in the social contract in itself, so those who crafted the Constitution, then they must have anticipated a situation where the government and a good section of the people would be at loggerheads, and that there has to be a peaceful way of going about things without having to resort to violence. And that in regards to how these protests end up turning into riots, it is a matter of, one, the situation, the specific situation in question. But of course, now let us just bring ourselves in the situation. Let us use the example of Kenya, where you find the governments on the protests, and of course this was now initially before dialogue was initiated. When you find a government taking a hard stance against people's own right to picket, then it is a recipe for violence, because the only other solution where demonstration and picketing does not work is war. Anywhere in the world where this has happened, it has always led to the fact that, and I mean, it goes back to my earlier point, what Malcolm X mentioned. If we cannot get what we want through the ballot, then we shall get it through the bullet. Now, I'm not here advocating for violence in any way whatsoever. But at the same time, it is important to acknowledge that the systems that have been set in place through the social contract are there to ensure that a society can continue even though large numbers of the people are not in agreement, that it does not have to degrade into civil war. So that we find that many of the countries that have derailed, that have gone all the way to civil war, is because dialogue broke apart. It's because dialogue broke apart. And so in this instance, if so the purpose of the picketing is to get to a point where we can dialogue, because clearly the elections was not enough. But if it gets to a point where picketing is not enough, what other option are people left with? So for example, when people start talking about secession, yeah, surely are we then to speak against it? Reason being, here you're talking about a people that have been constantly disenfranchised for decades on end. And why then it begs the question, why should they continue participating in a social contract that disenfranchises, that disenfranchises them? Yeah. And I believe this is the fundamental issue, that it's such an important issue that it should not be approached with a hard stance, as we see some of our African governments doing. It is a sensitive matter that needs to be dealt with sober minds, yeah, and as such, guide the country to the point where the issues can be addressed without violence. But remember, this is a ticking time bomb. It is something that has been in the coming for decades now. It is not something that has just simply happened because there's global inflation and the cost of living is high. It is just that the cost of living is high. It is also now a perfect moment that the people can come out in the streets and join these protests. The reason being, they can only attribute the situation in their homes to the way government is running the country. And so where we find hard stance being taken by either side in any situation, then it is a recipe for conflict. And by all means, it has to be avoided. And at the same time, it does not mean that revolution is not necessary. Andre.
Sorry, I was on mute. So there's a comment here that says, hence, I think it is high time we as individuals took responsibility and with collective effort see how we can each other contribute to rebuild Africa beyond just protesting. What and how can I do? I think that's always the question. We're always willing and want to be part of that change. The question is always, how can I do it? How can I be part of that change? The comment continues actually that the protests are on, but the results are not there, even though they attract attention. I think definitely that there's a very big problem right now because the protests are there, yes, attracting a big attention and attracting masses, but by the end of the day, are the price of the basic commodity lowered? The answer is no. By the end of the day, do we see the electoral reforms? No. By the end of the day, do we see jobs being created? In fact, more jobs are being destroyed. So the question we're asking ourselves on this show tonight, what is happening across the continent? The demonstrations, are they effective? And if not, how do we make them effective? For everyone who has been listening, wherever you are, thank you so much. I know this show is coming to you at a time that the world is at mess. Look at what is happening in Mozambique, for example, in South Africa. Look at what is happening in Zimbabwe, in Senegal. Actually, in Senegal is even a bit shocking because when President took power, he was really praised, and everyone said, finally, Senegal got a savior. What is coming to us now, we do not really understand, and that's why we don't want to talk about situation that we are not part of. I would like also to have our Senegalese brother joining us here on this panel very soon. Look at what's happening in Nigeria. Why do we think that elections are over? I mean, when will African nations have institutions that can run elections that can be done once and for all? That if you are defeated, you'll feel okay, fine. I understand how the system worked. I believe I was defeated in a fair and square manner. I won in a fair and square manner. We live to fight another day. I mean, it's always about the system. What is happening in Kenya since August to now? What's happening in South Sudan, in Egypt, in Tunisia? All these are the countries that we want to keep on encouraging because the more we talk, the nearer we are getting the solution because I mean as long as we keep talking about these issues we are always thinking and getting somewhere. So Oduho and Gilbert, even before I let you go, I'll be giving you one more last round just to give us your parting shot. But remember, next week on Friday we'll be back again with another great story of a great lady here called Caroline Namanga, who will be coming here to tell us her story, her journey. Imagine Oduho and Stark living life. Let me just tell you something. I met Caroline sometimes back, and I had been invited for a certain book launch, but I didn't know whose book launch I was going to. Imagine living a life physically handicapped, how hard it can be. But now living handicapped life and losing your loved ones, you can imagine how traumatic that can be. The case is so different with Caroline Namanga. She launched her two books just recently, and I attended the book launch in African Nazarene Church. That was, I think, when I say recent, not really recent, but just sometimes back. The introduction of this book is amazing. The book is called My Crashed World, and you should get this book and read about it. But I'm not just telling you to buy the book. I'm telling you to buy the story. I want you to buy the story and to get to see someone's experience. And of course, after reading this book, you should be asking yourself, is there really need to give up in life? Karen lost her arm to an accident that she doesn't recall very well at all. It was through a fire accident, she presumes. All she remembers is the fact that she was in pain and staying at home for 2 weeks without going to the hospital. By the time she was taken to the hospital, the hospital advised that now the arms had to be cut off. That's actually now what we're talking about. The money that was there was used to take her other siblings to the hospital because remember, they were all in this fire accident. And I mean, this story will be told better and well by Caroline herself when she joins us here next week on Friday. So tell everyone to tell a friend to tell everyone that we'll be back again on Friday with another great story. But tonight, it was very important to talk about the demonstrations because they're really affecting everything that we are doing. Whether positively or negatively, we have to talk about these stories. Gilbert, your 1 minute.
So, for my 1 minute, I'll just say that mine is just to communicate. I normally love nowadays. I normally love talking or addressing things on the common ground, and actually considering the normal normal norms that we adhere to that are not far more complexes stuff that are contrary and popularly heard of or seen. I would just love to address a statement to everyone who is in leadership or aspiring to be a leader. The only thing that is bringing all this conflict is just based on self-interest and the idea of we want to safeguard the future of our families and at least get to a point whereby we can. Leave something that I consider as a very informal and false legacy, whereby who managed to accumulate like most of the wealth. All these decisions that we're taking and trying to do are being looked at by our counterparts from other parts of the globe, whereby they might have interest. It necessarily doesn't mean that it has to be from other countries, but rather can also be in within our communities. So we have to be very cautious on how we exercise our beliefs and habits. And also to our brothers and sisters who are trying to protest, let's not forget that we are the same people who are being affected. You cannot deny the government the chance to get access to revenue and then expect a solution the next day. It is just quite impossible. So let's just be smart and also try to be soft. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duho?
Yes, thank you, Kondo. I believe Brother Gilbert was a good cop. Let me play the bad cop and say that which needs to be said. In the matter, you see, fundamentally, what we are discussing here is a matter of democracy and whether democracy is working in Africa. And if you ask me, I would say democracy is not working in Africa. In fact, democracy makes us more vulnerable to exploitation than preparing us, sufficiently to fight against these issues. So the question here remains: democracy in Africa was inherited as is. So we find that we practice what is known as a pure democracy, where it is majority have their way and the minority have their say. Fundamentally, this is what is the problem with a pure democratic system. And a solution is found using the example of the US in the Electoral College, where the election of the president relies not only on the majority vote, rather on the vote of the Electoral College. Without getting much into detail, and hopefully this shall be the subject of another discussion later, that fundamentally democracy as it is in Africa is more problematic than it is a solution to our problems. In that, well, it may not find much liking with those who may hear it, but it must be said. A pure democracy allows stupid people to gather in large numbers and make decisions for the rest of us. And then it begs the question: how, therefore, is such a system supposed to reflect a judicious estimate of the true will of the people? So, for example, in my country, in South Sudan, we voted to separate from the North. However, we're talking about a population whose majority is illiterate. And as such, the only form of voting that could be undertaken was either a yes or no vote. All right. And so we find that the people participating in a democracy they must possess a certain level, not necessarily of intellect, but it is a matter of knowledge of their civic duty and responsibility to the state. And as such, that every vote counts to the extent that it should, and I say should here with nauticity to be specific, it should reflect a judicious estimate of the true will of the people. However, we find that that is not the case. A pure democracy has put Africa in a situation where the majority are easily convinced by false promises, and as such give the ticket to an individual whom has the most promising promise, for lack of a better word. And that we now, as intellectuals in this conversation and other intellectuals who are listening to us right now, I believe it is our responsibility to develop a form of democracy that works for us. Why? That while democracy is the best form of government, it can also be the worst form of government. And this is why we see in Africa, our full political potential is yet to be achieved, let alone our economic potential. Why? Because as soon as we achieved political independence from the colonialists, therefore our own elites within our own countries took up that mantle. And hence we find that the situations that are now boiling up today in the form of these protests have their root cause in the foundation of our nations, and are specifically with regards to what type of government we adopted. Majority, it is a capitalist economy. This addresses the issue of how resources are distributed within a state. People are picketing because there is inequality, because the government is not working for them. It is a matter of resources and how the resources of a state are distributed amongst its citizenry. Therefore, in ultimate conclusion, it must mean a revisiting of the social contract. And whether or not individuals may like Raila Odinga, he is addressing a fundamental issue that I believe is important, because it addresses a revisiting of the social contract, the constitution here. That as long as the constitution is only working for a section of the population, then we will always find ourselves in a political quagmire.
Interesting. Wow. Ali is trying to join, but is a bit struggling. Is a serious struggle for him actually to join us now. But anyway, thank you so much, Ohisa Oduhu and Gilbert Stark, for staying from the time we started to now. Maybe just a quick one, because this is also one conversation that we'll be bringing on board very soon. And I know this is a very controversial matter, LGBTQ. Gilbert, Ohisa Oduhu,
Yes.
is this a conversation you'd like to be part of?
I would very much like to be part of, because I believe I have a solution to the problem.
You have a solution. Why? You're already calling it a problem.
Well, it is. And I believe when we're having the discussion, then we shall get into what I exactly mean by problem.
You know, I was avoiding this conversation because I was asking myself, why should we bring it here? But until today, when I saw Honorable George Opondo Peter Kaluma, you know him, Honorable
Yes.
Homa Bay Town constituency.
Yes.
And he has presented actually a bill to Parliament. And he says that I've submitted the Family Protection Bill. He's calling the Family Protection Bill to National Assembly of Kenya. And number one, it criminalizes the homosexuality, same-sex marriages, and LGBTQ behavior. Number two, it also criminalizes promotion, recruitment, funding of homosexuality and LGBTQ behavior. Number three, it bans sexual health and sexual health rights and education. Number four, bans comprehensive sexuality education in pre-primary, primary, and secondary schools education programs, the teaching of abortion or homosexuality, LGBTQ issues, masturbation to children. Number five, uphold the prior rights of parents and guardians to their children's education. Number six, reasserts the rights of parents to be informed and to consent to sexuality education, abortion procedures, and involving their children. Number seven, it defines sex as a biological state of being male or female, observed and assigned at birth. Number eight, it limits the rights to assembly, demonstration, association, expression, belief, privacy, employment in child care institutions in respect of homosexuality convicts and those engaged in LGBTQ behavior. Number nine, It prohibits adoption by homosexuals and LGBTQ persons. Number 10, proscribes sex acts on animals. Number 11, the penalty imposed under the proposed act ranges from imprisonment of at least 10 years to death. That is Honorable Pondo Kaluma Peter, the MP from Homa Bay County bill. And I think at some point we need to have that conversation here. Whether we like it or not, this is a conversation that we must have. Are you ready for this conversation, Odumo?
I am very ready.
Gilbert, is this a conversation you want to be part of?
Yeah, about the conversation, it's to some point. Let me just not talk much, but
But do you want to be part of this conversation? Yes,
I very much want to be part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Asante sana. You people have a good night. We meet again here next week on Friday, talking about the story of Caroline Namanga. In case maybe she's not able to show up, this is the conversation that we'll be having. LGBTQ.
Much obliged.
Good night, everyone, and have a great Easter. Good Friday, Easter Monday. Enjoy your time.